A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
Well, on a Friday, we like to check in with Christian commentator Bill Muehlenberg, who's never afraid of tackling those things that are controversial. And this may be a controversial conversation just ahead as we talk about one of the articles that Bill has written this week. And he's been reflecting on, first, in the state of Victoria, a two-tiered policing system, and then a two-tiered justice system. Now he's raising concerns about two-tiered healthcare. But as I say, it may be controversial because what we're talking about here is a two-tiered healthcare system that may favour Indigenous Australians. And so many of us want the best for Indigenous Australians. Bill Muehlenberg's back with us. Hey, Bill, welcome back to 2020.
Always great to be with you, Neil.
Hey, Bill, you're not afraid to tackle some tough issues. This is a tough one because when you start to say issues around who's equal and who's not, you're on shaky ground in some sense, aren't you?
Well, it would be shaky if we had governments who decided that some groups are more equal than others, and sadly that seems to be exactly what the Victorian Labour government has done. The story behind it is St. Vincent's Hospital has now got this policy where Indigenous people are expedited in terms of medical assessment and treatment earlier than other groups. Well, part of the rationale of Jacinta Allen and others is, well, they're kind of poor people and so they need preferential treatment. Well, there's plenty of non-Indigenous poor people who could use some, help when it comes to either making it to the emergency room and not sitting there for hours on end, which I've done before, or this problem with ambulance ramping, right, where you have paramedics sitting outside, 5, 10, 15 ambulances waiting to get in because the whole healthcare system in Melbourne and Victoria is really crumbling to bits at the moment. So they've decided they will give preferential treatment. It's kind of a two-tiered healthcare plan, at least through St. Vincent's, where Indigenous population gets kind of the head of the queue compared to everybody else. So the question is, wasn't justice supposed to be blind, right? Wasn't, justice is colorblind, doesn't look at race, ethnicity. It looks at need. Those who need help, they should be getting it equally and not putting one race or group ahead of another.
I guess we can all reflect back to the voice debate and how the no case battled the idea that it might look racist if they said everybody's equal and nobody's deserving of any special two-tiered preferential system. Is this the same sort of thing you're seeing here because the Allen government is pushing forward and wanting to bring a treaty in Victoria?
Yeah, well, exactly right. I mean, back in 2023, as you say, that referendum, the voice referendum, was soundly defeated, right? 60-40, roughly. I think the same vote here in Victoria. Australians said, no, we don't want it. And yet, as you point out, now Jacinta Allen is pushing to get through her own treaty with First Peoples, they call it, which is, really the voice in another form, but it's the same thing. The Victorian people rejected it. Allen is wanting to push it through with her Labour buddies and the Greens, and it's the same kind of thing. Australians on the whole don't want to see people treated by race or skin color. They want to see everybody treated equally for who they are. Christians know about this, right? We're all equal, we're all special because we're all made in God's image. But when you start looking at people in terms of their skin color and give them preferential treatment, as they're doing at St. Vincent hospitals. And by the way, there's more than just Melbourne. There's one in Sydney, could be one in Brisbane as well. So all their hospitals are doing this preferential treatment. That sounds like injustice. That sounds like racism. That almost sounds like apartheid to many.
But Bill, let me take a contrary view here to say that there have been successive federal and state governments that have been looking to close the gap because there's recognition of health outcomes in Aboriginal Australians that are much more dire than those who are non-Indigenous people. Is this, in some ways, what the Allen government might be doing to say, hey, we've got the best interests of Aboriginal people at heart? Any thoughts around that? Because there are some health issues, aren't there, when we talk about race and Aboriginal, non-Aboriginal?
Yeah, well, that would be part of her rationale for this, claiming that, we got to make up for lost territory, lost ground, and so on. A lot of questions arise, however. Are they still in such bad shape today in 2025? Well, having lived both half my life here and in America, it's kind of similar, actually, to the situation in the U.S. with affirmative action programs for blacks. We know there, and I think here, a lot of the big problems for poor health outcomes for blacks, certainly for children as well. In America, at least 2/3 of all young people are growing up without a father in the family. In the Northern Territory, that can be a big part of this as well. Family formation or family breakdown is often a big indicator of just how well or poorly people will grow and thrive in a location. So, the usual claim by Labor and others, it's systemic racism. We're all a bunch of racists, and therefore that's why they're struggling. Well, that's one way to look at it. But again, some of the other data, some of the other indicators are the problems, if they still exist, can often have as much to do with family formation as anything. And again, there's poor non-Black people, poor non-Indigenous people. Should they be neglected, put at the back of the queue simply because of the color of their skin? If they're suffering for whatever reason and need help in health care, shouldn't they be able to get it just as equally as anybody else? Or why do we have to have instead this preferential treatment?
So if there's a government that has some sort of altruistic policy, when they implement it, it really means there's another group that's going to actually suffer other disadvantage or discrimination. Hey, what are Indigenous leaders saying about what's going on in Victoria?
Well, thankfully, they're not all jumping up and down over Jacinta Allen's plan here and the hospital's plan. There's been many already. Warren Mundine, of course, one very well-known Indigenous leader. And I'm sure, by the way, Jacinta Price will be coming out, if she hasn't already, saying much the same thing. Hey, we don't need this. We need equality here. In fact, Mundine said, we're not asking for this kind of stuff that we're seeing in these hospitals. We want to be treated like everyone else. Even went on to say, I'm horrified. This should be about needs. It should be about emergencies, not about governments trying to push one group over and above the others. So, it's not just me or others concerned about this. We've got even some of the key leaders in the Indigenous community also saying, hey, we're not in favor.
And what about the opposition? I mean, it's still a long way off another Victorian state election. And with the Allen government pushing this way, are the opposition, in your opinion, rising to be an opposition in this?
Well, they're trying, and, this is a long-standing complaint. We don't really have much of an opposition here in Victoria. But, there's some good players there. There's some good pollies. And, the health minister, opposition health minister, has been saying this is wrong. We shouldn't be treating people based on their skin color. We should be treating them according to their needs, according to what they have in terms of health conditions. So we can applaud the minister for, coming out and saying this. I think most Victorians would certainly agree with her. And it's interesting as well, she mentioned the word triage in her discussion. That's something I had planned to put in my article anyway, so I took it a bit further. Most listeners would know in time of war or whatever, a tsunami, earthquake, massive fires where you've got far fewer health professionals and supplies, but you got so many patients and casualties. Well, triage simply means you sort the patients out according to need. Those who seem pretty clear they're going to pass away in the next hour. Well, you don't give all your time and resources to them. You instead concentrate on those who have special acute emergencies, who can be helped if they quickly get some life-helping care. So, that's kind of the good sense of triage. But if Jacinta Allen thinks that somehow applies in this situation, again, I don't get it. If there's a white person or a black person both in great need, whether emergency room or getting in with a paramedic, it should not matter what your skin color is. It should be determined on your need, full stop. And, historical triage was the same. You didn't first look at somebody's ethnicity or race. You simply helped those who could be helped. So it's, we're getting some flack against Jacinta Allen, which is good to see. But I think we could use a whole lot more.
Bill, let's talk Christian thinking on all of this, because I know that there's listeners who might even be divided around the way these things are unfolding in Victoria. How do we think about that biblically? What have you been able to ascertain? Yeah.
Well, in my recent piece, I put there's two things at least Scripture gives us. Yes, we should be concerned about the poor and the needy, the indigent. We should help those who can't help themselves. Now, that's a big discussion. We can ask how much should the state do? How much should individuals do? Right? And there is deserving and undeserving poor. Paul even said, if you're not going to work, you're not going to eat. So the question of the welfare state and how much of this belongs to the responsibility of bureaucrats and governments, how much individual believers and churches and community groups can do, that's one discussion. But another big matter, of course, found in Scripture is that of justice. I think I already mentioned, right? Justice is blind. Lady Justice, the statue, right, has the blindfold around her eyes. What is that about? Well, you treat people equally and fairly. You don't prejudice people based on how they look, what their skin color is, and so on and so on. Justice should be about treating everyone fairly and equally, and there's lots of scriptures on that in the Bible as well. I even quoted a bunch at the end of my piece. Exodus 23, do not show favoritism to a poor man in his lawsuit. Similar Leviticus 19, don't pervert justice, don't show partiality to the poor or favoritism to the great. You got a lot of passages about unequal weights and unequal measurements. That's part of what justice is. Showing partiality is not good, Proverbs 28. So if there's a lot of scriptural data on the need to help those who need help, there's also a lot of data saying, hey, we need to treat people equally. We don't push kind of affirmative action policies preferencing one group above another. We treat everyone equally and give them all the help that they need.
Of course, when there's unequal treatment, we call that apartheid, don't we? And we've seen this historically around the world. So I guess the Christian view is always typically to stand against the idea of apartheid. But both sides might argue that they're the ones who are standing in the right place. As Christian believers, I guess, take a biblical view and stand firm in that and don't favour anyone who is in disadvantage. Hey, Bill, I'll point listeners to this latest article we're talking about today. It's called Health Care Racism. The focus is on Victoria. There might be some listeners who want to explore a little more deeply the sorts of things that you've been talking about in this article. You'll be able to find it at billmuehlenberg.com or simply Google Culture Watch, one word. Bill, thanks so much for another very, very controversial but insightful conversation today on 2020.
Many thanks, Neil.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.